Well, it's great to see you all today. My name is Meg Saunders, and I'm an Assistant Director of Business and Technology at the UVA Career Center. I'm also a double who, so this webinar series has brought me a lot of joy because I've been able to reconnect with some other awesome alumni that want to speak to you about their careers. So again, thank you for joining us for our third webinar in the Banking and Finance 101 webinar series. The UVA Career Center is hosting a series for banking and finance, a series for consulting, and a series for technology. And we're doing this to help you all and to educate you all on the various paths that you can pursue within each field. Be sure to look under events on Handshake for more information. Additionally, a big shout out to Jen Jones from the UVA Economics Career Office for partnering with us today and bringing in our awesome alum, Michael. If you've missed previous webinars, no problem. You can actually check them out on the UVA Career Center YouTube page. I'll put that link in the chat once I introduce our guest today. Additionally, another cool thing that the business and technology team has been up to is we created a Slack channel. It's pretty brand new. We have about 80 users on it, and it's been open for 2 to 3 weeks now. So go ahead and join it. We're posting opportunities, jobs, internships, events on a daily basis. I will also add that to the chat box once I'm done, again, introducing our guest today. So before I continue, let's talk about housekeeping. So first and foremost, I'd love for you to insert your major and or your year into the chat, just so that Michael can get a good grasp of who is here today. And if you have an undeclared major, that's also okay. You could say College of Arts and Science and then also your year. Additionally, please keep yourself on mute. It is, as far as video goes, I'd love to see your smiling faces, but we are recording this video, so just be aware that if we record it and your video is on, you will likely be in the video. And then also, speaker view is going to provide a better viewing experience. So my suggestion would be to change to speaker view, which is in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. You can switch from gallery view to speaker view. As we continue through this program tonight, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I have a list of questions to ask Michael, but if you have questions based off the questions I'm asking, I would love to stop and pause and ask your question as well. If you do not put questions in chat as I'm asking my questions, we will pause at the end for additional questions. Now I want to introduce tonight's alum. We have Michael Pugliese. He's a graduate of the class of 2015, where he majored in economics and government. Michael is now an economist at Wells Fargo in New York City. I'm so looking forward to having Michael here today to do this informational interview. I feel like he's going to have a lot of insight and wisdom to impart on us. So Michael, please introduce yourself and give us some insight into your career trajectory.
Yeah, well, thanks, Meg, and thanks everyone for joining me today. So yeah, again, I'm Mike Pugliese. I graduated in 2015. I was an econ and government double major. And maybe I'll just start by talking a little bit about how I got into the job that I have now, and then we can talk some about kind of what I do, what it's like, what I like about it, what I don't like about it. So when I was going into my third year at UVA, I really wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I was an econ and government double major. I didn't have a huge interest in the comm school, but I had a lot of friends that were in it or other econ majors who were thinking about consulting and banking and other jobs like that. I was thinking maybe Baton, so I was going to maybe apply, do the accelerated MPP program. And then I saw a job posting on, I think it was Cavlink at the time. I don't think you guys use that anymore, right? It's Handshake, right? That's what it's called? Yeah. Yep. Similar idea. And so I saw a posting for a summer internship in Charlotte, North Carolina with Wells Fargo Securities. So that's the investment banking arm of Wells Fargo. And the job was for an analyst internship in their economic research group. Didn't really know what that was, had no idea what I was getting myself into. But I said, well, that sounds kind of interesting and different. And they were doing on-grounds interviews. So I gave it a shot, did a first round, really liked it, did a second round, seemed interesting. And they gave me an offer, and I said to myself, well, it's 10 weeks. I'll live in Charlotte. I've never been before. What's the worst thing that can happen? I'm probably going to not do any of this anyway because I'm going to do an MPP at Baton. And the funny thing was I got the internship and then didn't really like it that much. The first half of the internship, I wasn't a huge fan. And I think that was mostly just a byproduct of it was the first time I'd had like a real job like that. I had done part-time internships, unpaid internships. I'd worked just regular summer type jobs in retail and that kind of stuff. But I'd never had like a real corporate type job. So I think a lot of the reason I didn't like it at first was just a byproduct of that adjustment. And then I got an offer at the end of the summer to come back. Really struggled with the decision whether or not to take that, to interview elsewhere, to stay with Baton. But eventually took the job and have been doing it since for those past 5 years.
Awesome, Michael. So tell us a little bit more about how your academics, well, actually, let's start with what exactly do you do? What is the role of research in an investment bank? I know that's a big question, but if you could break it down to us in layman terms, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so if you think about how an investment bank is set up, right, and it's a little confusing because there's investment banking, which is really a subsector of an investment bank. So like you have the investment bank or the private side of the securities house, and that's kind of what you think of traditionally. It's mergers and acquisitions, debt origination, equity capital market stuff. And then there's the public side, and that's sales and trading, right? So that's the selling of securities, trading of securities, be it fixed income, equities. And those are really the two kind of bread and butter segments of an investment bank, right? And then within that, there's all kinds of other functions. There's technology, there's operations, all kinds of stuff. But then one is research. And traditionally, when you think about research in an investment bank, I think what most people think of is they think of equity research. So there's an analyst, and that analyst covers a sector, large cap technology stocks like Apple and Google. And they write reports, they recommend buy, sell, they have price targets, that kind of thing. What I think is less well known is there are other kinds of research within an investment bank. There's macro type research with economists, with currency strategists, with interest rate strategists. There's credit research. So they look at the bonds of Apple and Google and Caterpillar and Wells Fargo and all these kinds of companies. And so what we do is we kind of do the research and then either communicate it via written reports or via presentations, big public ones in front of hundreds of people, or small one-on-one client meetings. And those client meetings cut across a really broad range of clients. So it could be a hedge fund, a really fast money type client. It could be a corporation that's thinking about issuing debt and maybe they want to do it fixed rate or floating rate or in different currencies. It could be a mid-sized company thinking about expanding into different geographic parts of the country, parts of the world. They want to know what the Fed is going to do or what Congress is going to do. I mean, the kind of examples are endless. But within that, that's kind of the role of an investment bank. Or I'm sorry, that's the role of research within an investment bank. So my group specifically is about a dozen people ranging from the chief economist all the way down to a few analysts fresh out of college. And our kind of role is producing that research and then presenting it via the reports and then presenting it via the presentations. So I put in the chat, and I'm not sure if anyone can see it, but I'm just going to recopy it here very quickly and repost it. So if you go to this link here, this is actually a link to our research reports. So this is just the general website that we have. And then I'm going to post a second link to just one that I've written on more recently. So the second link is just a report I wrote about 3 weeks or so ago now, talking about what another round of stimulus might look like in Congress. So my specific focus, kind of what my coverage responsibility is on the policy side. And we'll maybe get into kind of how I had got a background in that and the government side of my major. But so I cover a lot on, well, what's Congress doing? What are they doing with tax policy and regulatory policy and spending and deficits? And what does that mean for different asset classes and interest rates and that kind of stuff? So at a high level, that's what research is kind of in an investment bank, and then more specifically what my group does.
Awesome. Thank you so much for giving us specific examples. Students definitely take a look at that, just so that to me, that's seeing what work you do right on your computer screen. So kind of dialing it back to undergrad, How did your liberal arts majors really translate to your career, especially a career that's so quantitative?
Yeah, so I was like I said, I didn't apply to the comp school. It just didn't, I never pictured myself working in an investment bank. So it just seemed like kind of a silly route for me. Um, and then when I thought about what I was most interested in, I thought about politics, but I worked on a few campaigns and stuff like that as an undergraduate. Hated it, absolutely hated it. Realized I didn't want to do that at all. And so then I was like, well, I really kind of like more of the policy side of it. So I was studying economics. I was doing, like I said, the government side. I thought I wanted to do that. And really, when I think about what my job is, it's finance related ish, but it's really not, right? I mean, to a large extent, my job is a lot different than my friends I have that are, say, working on a deal flow type situation for an M&A group within the bank. So, they're much more finance driven, right? They're working on a model that's meant to, whether the acquirer or the acquiree, right? You're trying to, value something on a more micro scale. My job's much more macro, and it's much more kind of research driven, right? I don't come in every day at this stage in my career, at least, with a goal from my manager. That was a little different, maybe when I was a first or second year out of college, that was a little bit different. But today, I mean, very literally, I kind of set my own workflow. I come in, I sit down at the computer, and I've got a Bloomberg terminal up and other resources. And I'm saying, okay, what's happening in the world? What's the news out of DC? What's happening with lockdowns? What's the most recent kind of economic data? And then I try to kind of organically and on my own come up with ideas. Take my pulse of what do clients want to hear about, what do they want to read, what do they want to see, what would be good content, what would get people to kind of click on this. And that's a much more creative job, honestly. It's a little bit of a less linear process. I don't just sit down and create a deck or, kind of plug some stuff into a model. I mean, there's aspects of that, of course. But people think about these kinds of roles and they think about the quantitative stuff, and there's absolutely a role for that in econometrics and statistics and that kind of stuff. But like I say to kind of new hires all the time, if people don't click the article, it's irrelevant how interesting or thought-provoking your analysis is, right? If I can't get you to open that and start reading, if I lose you after the first two paragraphs, I could have the most interesting and crushing it model in the world, but it doesn't matter, right? And so there is an element of, can you communicate your ideas? Can you do so in a way that's succinct and concise and gets you going and, has clever titles. And I think of that personally as more of a liberal arts type skill than just a pure quantitative type thing that comes from financial modeling or something like that. So for me, I always liked what the economics and government kind of pairing was, which was, it was a mix of quantitative stuff and a mix of the softer skills, the communication skills. And I use both of those pretty much every day.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. I think that's something that students love to hear and need to hear from the horse's mouth, as they say. So you mentioned that you had an internship or you had an experience in politics, and you were like, no.
Right.
What other experiences did you have outside of your coursework that maybe helped you to develop the skill set necessary to do the job that you do today?
Yeah. So one thing that jumps to mind was I applied and did a fellowship at like a small think tank in DC. It was called the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. And the way it works was they select like a couple kids from a bunch of schools around the country, and you do like a 9-month fellowship where you go in the fall and then you kind of do like a 3-4 day seminar, and then you come back in the spring, do another one, and in the interim you do a research project. And the research project is basically, it's pretty broad. It can be on some subject that interests you. And so it just has to have some type of tie, unsurprisingly, to the presidency and Congress. Mm-hmm. And so they give you a mentor. You can work with professors at the school. And so that really was a good exercise in what I do now, which is kind of independent research, but a little more applied. It wasn't very academic. It wasn't meant to go on for 100 pages. It wasn't meant to have 19 million footnotes. I mean, it was research, and it was long, and it was hopefully well done and thoughtful, but it wasn't written for an academic audience. So that was a great experience that I had. Another thing that I did when I was an undergraduate was I was a guide at UVA. And I do a lot of public speaking, a lot. Again, that's not necessarily something you think of as a skill that a lot of economists have, right? It's not something that some economists are, but not everyone's comfortable with. And when I say a lot, I mean, so last year, in normal times, right, this has not been the case this year, but last year I did 120 presentations. And those presentations could range from small stuff, right? I mean, small things, me, a couple other people, and a couple clients, to I did 1,000 plus at the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce last year. I did a 6-country, 11-day tour of Asia that went through, it was Singapore, the Philippines, Thailand, India, Japan, Indonesia. It was all over the place. And that's really public speaking driven. And it's the same thing, right? If you kind of get up there and you're stumbling over your words and you're not making any sense, and you don't have an ability to connect with an audience at all, you can lose people, and they get up and they go to the back and get cookies and check their phone and kind of tool around in the back, and you're not actually communicating the message. So that was another thing where I learned all kinds of little skills like that. A really simple one was, I got taught early on, if you're in a big group and someone asks a question, repeat it back to the audience, because odds are there's someone on the other side of the room that can't hear it.
Right.
And if they don't know what the question is, they're not going to listen to your answer, because why would they? Then they lose interest. They check their phone. They talk to the person next to you.
Right.
So all kinds of little stuff like that I felt like was useful, that at the time I just thought it was useful for giving a tour to parents.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I use that all the time on much bigger scale stuff. So those are just 2 examples that I think immediately jumped to mind for me. One last one was, I always kind of like to take a few history classes. Wasn't a minor in it or anything like that, but that's another thing where I took some economic history classes and stuff like that. And that's always useful, because something will happen in the world. And one of the very first tools people reach for is, well, has anything like this happened before? What tools got used the last time? What was the reaction? What was this? What was that? And ability to draw on that kind of stuff, both just from a general knowledge standpoint and from a research standpoint, is also, I think, useful for at least this kind of role.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so cool. I'm jealous of your 2019 travels. I think we all are. You're probably jealous.
I'm jealous of myself. I haven't gone on a work trip in months, and not all of them are glamorous. Trust me. You get sent some places, particularly early on, that aren't quite as cool. I've been some really strange places. I've been to Saskatchewan, Canada, and Jackson, Mississippi, and all kinds of places that I definitely otherwise wouldn't have got a chance to go. So it's a perk. It can be a little tiring, but it's mostly a perk.
Now you're missing it, though.
I am 100% missing it.
Awesome. So so if you had to choose one thing that was your favorite about the field, and then one thing that you didn't love as much about the field, what would they be?
Yeah. I think my favorite thing about it is it's a super unique finance job. My hours are long, but they're not banking. I work on an average day now, maybe 7 to 5:30, maybe a little longer than that when I was first out of college, but not much. I rarely work weekends. That comes with the caveat of the travel, honestly. I've had some really, really long travel weeks where I maybe wasn't working those hours, but I was, getting back late at night, traveling late into the week, and, coming back late on a Friday. But it does cut both ways. I've had other ones where, I got back at 3:00 on a Friday from a trip and was like, well, I'm probably good for the day now, and was good to go and didn't have to sign back in or anything. So that's great. I love the macro aspect of it. Again, I spend my day talking to clients about what Congress is going to do, what the Fed is going to do, what's going on with the unemployment rate now. Obviously, there's a million things happening in the current environment, and it's topical, it's interesting. And to me, at least, I find it more intellectually stimulating than more micro stuff of, covering the same 6 companies. And again, it's not to knock that. It's that I personally kind of find this role to be intellectually stimulating from a macro standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
That, and I really enjoy the communication aspect of it. It was why I was a guide at UVA. It was part of why I like politics. And, I was terrified from an economic standpoint of what happens if I'm just stuck writing an academic paper for years that has an audience of 8 people around the world. and I'm the only people who can talk to me about the subject are the other 7 people that are like specialized in it. And I don't have that at all. And I really enjoy kind of waking up every day and saying, okay, not only do I need to find the answer to whatever question it is I'm trying to solve, but how do I communicate it graphically, visually, on paper, in slide decks, in media, which I've done a handful of times. And that's like a whole nother challenge that's separate from answering the problem or answering the question that I personally, again, really enjoy. Not for everyone, but I like. On the what do I like least about it? That's kind of hard. It's a real high when you have a moment of you wrote a great research report, you had a media thing, you had a presentation went really well. And then you have other days where it's tough, right? You're struggling to answer the question, or you're struggling to come up with a good way to communicate the idea, or both, which happens all the time. And the job is less linear, right? So it's not like you can kind of just fall back on, okay, well, I just have to like knock off A, B, C, D, E, and F for my checklist for the day, which can again be a little bit more challenging. So it's a frustrating job because there's not always an answer, right? I mean, there's tons of stuff happening right now for which there is no answer. And people don't like that. People want answers, right? And so when you get paid to kind of give answers at a very high level, and it's not exactly right, but like kind of, it can be unsatisfying for both parties, both from my side and from the other person's side, when the honest answer sometimes is, I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's the truth. So I think that can be difficult. And the second thing is, at the end of the day, when you think about, again, how an investment bank is set up, I'm a front office employee, but I'm still somewhat of a support staff, right? I'm not driving the deal, and I'm not driving the sale or the trade directly. Hopefully I'm doing it indirectly, and there's a lot of client interaction and front office stuff that I like. But it's like, it's a little bit like being the top engineer on like a fighter jet, right? Like, you are critically important to the functioning of the fighter jet, but you are not Goose, right, from Top Gun, right? Like, you're not actually the pilot getting in the plane.
Right.
So again, some people, they want the experience of being, 30,000 feet in the air, breaking the sound barrier. And you can get that to some extent in my job, but you're still not, at the end of the day, a risk taker like you would be if you're a flow trader in corporate bonds, or, someone who's managing very directly an M&A type deal. So again, I don't necessarily think that's something that I'm looking for, which is why I like the job. But for other people, I could see that being a con.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that perspective. That's very succinct. We can tell you public speak all the time. Like, very good at like remembering the questions that I ask and all that good stuff. So, okay. So a lot of students have had their internships or their jobs or just their experiences in general canceled for the summer due to COVID.
Right.
And I think about the 2 experiences you shared as ways that you built skills outside of your coursework. And those things aren't necessarily going to be, students aren't necessarily going to be able to do those things this year. So, I mean, I know you like to be creative. So what would be some creative things or some ways that these students can spend this downtime to take advantage of the downtime and really gain skills to better themselves when they reach recruitment?
Yeah. So let me first answer it from you have an internship, right? And you're doing it virtually, and you're thinking to yourself, what the heck is going on? And then for someone who's maybe doesn't have one for whatever reason, and we'll talk about that. So I think my advice to any intern, either currently started or has already started, is just bear in mind, this is unique for all of us, right? Every intern and most interns have that eagerness of, I want to show them how hardworking I am and how smart they am, and I only have so many weeks to do it, and I want to get a job offer, and I want to get good reviews and good recommendations. And I think there's already kind of a habit of an intern to be very eager and anxious, and that's a good thing for the most part. But it's hard because maybe now you're not sitting in front of your manager, you're not showing them your work or some other person. And what I would just say is, if you're feeling concerned or scared or frustrated about that, bear in mind, everyone's got that problem. I haven't seen my manager in person in months. I want him to know that I am working hard and doing my job and coming up with good ideas and, so on and so on. So just don't fret that too much, because you're not the only one in that circumstance. Everyone is in that kind of situation right now. You know, the best thing you can do is kind of do the task they set in front of you. Don't be afraid to ask questions, but there's no need, at least in my view, to every 20 minutes feel like you need to be pinging someone or on the phone with someone just to make sure that, you know, they're aware that you are out there crushing it and doing a great job. You know, again, I can't speak to every work culture in the world, so take that with a grain of salt. But I think that would be my advice. I think if I was an intern right now, I would be so concerned that my manager is like, oh, I'm sure he's just sitting in his room playing Xbox right now, wiggling the mouse every 5 minutes. And I think over the course of an internship, even if it's virtual, if they're giving you things to do, helping you participate, setting things up, doing their best, hopefully you won't have an issue like that. So my very high level advice would just be take a deep breath and try not to worry too much about it, because you're not the only one worried about that kind of stuff. So just keep in mind. If you don't have an internship because it was canceled to coronavirus or some other challenge, I think my 2 pieces of advice would be you can always be learning, right? Like we were just talking about. Learn something. Pick up a good book that's going to provide insightful stuff. So in the middle of March, just to use a concrete example, when the world was falling apart and the Fed was pulling out all these emergency programs it had pulled out from the crisis, that was a period I knew a lot about. That was, for me, right around when I was getting ready to go to college. So I was trying to pick a major. The crisis kind of impacted my family on a very personal level for a variety of reasons, like economically. It was what drew me to economics and politics in the first place. And so I'd written Ben Bernanke's I'd read Ben Bernanke's memoirs, and you know, other books like that, just out of kind of a personal interest. And that was invaluable in that period because I knew way more than I had any business knowing about the 18 kind of alphabet soup programs that they had adopted in 2008, 2009, that they then blew the dust off of a few months ago. And so little stuff like that you never think may end up being useful can, I think, end up being practical. I took up coding over the past few months. Never done it before in my life other than some limited stuff in like VBA with Excel and Stata and some of the statistical softwares, but like an actual programming language like Python. I'm not an expert. I by no means am going to go work for Google anytime soon. But I think even just having that, not just as a hard skill, but as something you could talk about. You know, if I was sitting across from an interview, room with you in a few months, or doing this virtually in an interview, and I said, hey, how'd you spend it? And you said, you know, I just read all the books I could get my hands on the 2008 financial crisis to see what I could learn about today. And I developed a foundation in Python. I'd be like, wow, that's great. Sounds like you had a pretty productive summer to me. And I would kind of write that down as like, sounds like they've got a very curious mind. They like to learn. And I personally wouldn't take that as a knock at all. In fact, in some ways, it may be even better than having an internship where you did just sit there and wiggle your mouse for 5 weeks. So, that would be my advice, is just think about what you can do to say, I use this time productively. And then maybe one last point, just kind of from an individual standpoint, is ask yourself what you want to do in the first place. In hindsight, I think I was so worried about finding something that kind of fit what I thought I was looking for, that I didn't stop and think a little bit further down the road of, okay, well, what does it mean if you move to Charlotte right out of college? I mean, that sounds like a fine idea, but where's that going to put you a couple years down the road? Then you're never going to know. But that was not a question I was worried about. I was worried very concretely about like getting a job and having something on the other side of graduation. And in hindsight, I almost wish I'd had a month in the summer there between, say, my third and fourth year, or even between second and third year, to sit down and say, okay, where do you want to be? Literally, geographically. Where do you want to be a little further out in your career? And you never know. I still don't know. But actually thinking about those questions, as opposed to just a very short run of, I have to find a consulting or banking internship where I'm going to fail, which is an awful mindset, is just, I think, maybe not as productive. So if you're doing that during this period, don't do that.
Yeah, that's such a good, so many tidbits there. So I'm actually going to post in the chat the Coursera, link to our Coursera site. So students, we have, you have access for free to Coursera through July 31st. So you can start a program or start a course before July 31st. And as long as you finish it before September 30th, you will have, again, free access to learn the things that Michael is literally listing out here. There are just like hundreds of classes on there. So definitely click on that link and see what you want to start learning. It's all online, all self-paced, and all free. So why not take advantage of it? Michael, I want to loop back around to a book. Do you have any book suggestions for the students?
Do I have any book suggestions? Yes, I do actually. And I'm going to betray my own interest. So if you're still signed on, you must like this stuff a little bit. One of the best books I've ever read, and a book that's really interesting from today, is a book called The Great Depression: A Diary. And it's not real long. It's maybe only a few hundred pages. The author's name is Benjamin Roth. And it's a guy whose grandfather had lived through the Great Depression. His grandfather was a lawyer in Youngstown, Ohio, and didn't have a finance background. He was a lawyer, but started keeping a journal just about what was happening in the world during the Great Depression, as he kind of self-taught economics and finance and business that he started around the start of the Great Depression and kept all the way through the 1930s. And the guy is a good writer. He's interesting. It's kind of a mix of economic history, but also like on a more micro level. And I don't mean like microeconomics, like graphs and that kind of stuff. Like I very literally mean like what he's seeing in his town, with his friends, with his family, what he's reading on the news. And like I said, it's not a very hard read. It's maybe 250 pages. It's written by a non-author or academic, so it's kind of written in layman's terms. And it's super interesting. I read it after the financial crisis in like the 2010s. And I've actually been thinking I wanted to reread it, just given everything that's going on recently with all the headlines. And it's just interesting to kind of see what lessons are applicable today. What did they get right? What did they get wrong? What's similar to what was being seen at the time? How did Congress react? How did the Federal Reserve act? So I think that's just the one that jumps to mind right away, is that book.
Awesome. I just actually sent the link.
Perfect.
On link to everyone. I may have to read that myself. I love history and all of that good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, right. If you like history, I think you'll like that book.
Yeah. So I'm wrapping up my questions here, but one of the things that students are going to be approaching this year is going to be virtual recruiting. And so with you and your kind of background and presentation, and then also, your background in having gone through recruitment, what are some tips, tricks, strategies that you could suggest to a student as they prepare for something virtual?
Yeah. So I've learned a little bit of this from my job. I've done a few interviews, and I don't mean like for a job, but like maybe for media type things, or if you go to our website, we do like a monthly economic outlook. Now we've had to start interviewing each other over Zoom. I'm sure you guys at the Career Service Center have even more tips than I can give, but a couple simple ones like test your audio, pull up the camera app, see what your background looks like, move things around if you need to. The hardest thing is looking in the camera. It's very unnatural. My eyes want to drift down to Megan or myself over here. But like I've been told several times, look directly in the camera like you're talking to someone in person. I've got my computer on a few stacks of books so that it's like a little more level with my head. So it's not like coming from underneath me. So like I've had a few of those. I don't know if you have other ones you want to add, Megan, but like there's just a handful I've been told, like get the camera as level as you can with your face, check your background, check your audio, and like try not to stare at yourself or the interviewer, and like look right at them.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing. Students ask me, and I'm like, look at the camera. And so when we do mock interviews, I tell them, okay, look at the camera. And I'm not looking at the camera. I'm looking at the screen right now. That's the natural thing to do. But to stare at the camera is the way to go. And it's really hard because then they can't see body language, And that's a big part of an interview, is being able to read the interviewer's body language. And you can't see that when you're looking at the camera. But yeah, I would agree with all those. Audio quality, what's in your background. Also internet quality. I mean, that seems to be a given, but it's, not everyone has good internet. So try to find a place that you could have good internet.
Right.
A place that your roommates aren't going to bother you, or your dog's not going
Right.
to bark, or
Right. Yeah. Or just even do a practice session. I learned the hard way after a couple of these that, like, if it's really that concerning, I really need to go somewhere else because I'm sitting right over a major avenue in the city, and like a fire truck will come by where I can't even hear myself think.
yeah.
And so, there's all kinds of different little things like that where maybe do an interview with a friend and they're like, you realize your lighting is a nightmare. Every time you move your head a little bit like this, half your face goes into a shadow. So I think my advice would just be practice that, and then otherwise treat it like any other interview. Try not to get too hung up on the fact that you're doing it virtually. Just think about what they, asked. What was the question? Try to answer it directly. Try to be succinct, and do your best to treat it like you're actually face to face with the person, and try not to think too much about the fact you're doing it over Zoom. Again, I know it's hard and it's a little more unnatural, but it's just something that comes with practice.
Absolutely. Okay, students. Well, I'm going to open it up now for questions. So please put your questions. You can either put them in the group chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question to Michael. So Noah's asking, what was your career trajectory like? Did you move locations, when, and how?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did the internship in Charlotte and got an offer to go back to Charlotte. And it was really a 2-year analyst program. And so the idea was you go, you do it for 2 years, and then more than likely you move on to something else. For whatever reason, that's how it generally works in banking. Sales and trading, which is generally a little bit more of a kind of promote up type experience. Again, not always, but just as a general rule of thumb. And my group operated more on the banking model, where most people after 2 years went back to grad school, they moved somewhere else within the bank, or they got a new job, or whatever. So I kind of treated this like I was going to go do something else, go back and maybe get a master's degree in something, or move somewhere else within the bank, or get a new job. And at around the 18-month mark, I actually had a new job offer. I was going to work for a place called the Peterson Foundation, which is like a think tank kind of nonprofit that does like fiscal policy research and advocacy and stuff in New York. And then got an opportunity to stay with my group. And what they wanted me to do was they wanted me to spend 1 more year, do a 3rd-year analyst program, and then get moved to New York and become an associate. And that worked well for both sides. They wanted someone in New York. I was kind of looking to get out of Charlotte at that point. It gave me an opportunity to go to school at night, which is something I've been doing since I moved here a couple years ago. So in the spring of 2018, I moved to New York City and then started a master's program at night at NYU in the fall that I've been doing for, I guess, about 2 years now. And then I became a VP in February. So, right, in an investment bank, it's kind of usually, not always, but usually it's analyst, associate, VP, director, and then managing director. So I moved locations, and that was really kind of a symbiotic thing where they wanted someone in New York, and I was interested in going. So I actually agreed to stay with them as opposed to the job offer that I had previously. So, I've been doing the same. I've been in the same group for 5 years, but my role has kind of changed some as I've been promoted a couple times and went from, as a 1st or 2nd year analyst, I didn't travel at all, other than maybe the occasional trip with a more senior person. Whereas kind of today, it's almost like having your own book of business, for lack of a better phrase, that now the job description is a lot different in terms of what I'm doing on a daily basis. But yeah, I did get promoted twice, and I did move locations in the process there.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Noah, for the question. So next we have, did having a double major alongside your econ degree help you in the recruiting process? To reword that, if you are an econ major without a double major, would you recommend getting a double major to increase the probability of getting a job?
I think it can't hurt. I don't think it's necessarily the end all be all. I think it's useful in how you sell yourself. Like when I was in the process, something I tried to sell was I'm an econ major and all the benefits that come of that, from quantitative skills and critical thinking and that kind of stuff. But I was a government major too. And so I like to write. I like to read. I hopefully am decent at communicating ideas. And I would talk about how I liked the fact that those were kind of two complementary majors, right? As opposed to two that were sort of very similar. But at the same time, we hire people in my group all the time without a double major. So I don't necessarily think it's like a huge leg up. If I was reviewing resumes, I don't think I would look at it and say, oh, well, they only had a major and a minor. That disqualifies them. I wouldn't think about it that way at all. But I think if you have kind of a story you can tell about how it's grown your skills, either hard skills or soft skills, then I do think it adds some value. So if you can squeeze it in, and particularly if you can squeeze it in a way that makes sense to you, I would do that. Advice I was giving, I have a 16-year-old half-brother who's starting to think about college, and I was talking to him about this recently. My more general advice is always, people are good at some things and not others. Try to focus on the things you're not naturally good at. Like, I'm a pretty good communicator, I think, but the quantitative stuff just doesn't come as naturally. It's not that I can't do it. It's that I have to work harder to be good at it. And so something I try to do is focus my energy on that skill set I'm not good at. And it's hard because the easy thing to do is just take a class that you're naturally going to kill it because you're good at the skill. Try not to do that, I think, would be my more easily applied advice. Like, you don't necessarily have to go out now and double major in astrophysics if you're not good at math. But say to yourself, well, I have a skill set that I want to sharpen some. Because then if that comes up in a job or in an interview or whatever, you have an example where you might not be a double major, but you could say, yeah, you know what? I'm not especially good at writing, but I tried to take a couple classes that were very writing focused in addition to my engineering degree to improve on that. And I think I would personally really like that in an interview. Not that I wouldn't like if you were double major in English or something, but that's maybe not as feasible. So I think if you could have that as an example, it would be good both in an interview and also just it would be good in that you have the skill.
Awesome. Thank you. So next we have, how much of your research would you say is written for or presented to private clients versus general public? Or do researchers focus on one or the other?
That's another really good question. So most Wall Street research is private. For example, if you wanted to read the research report of, Bank X's coverage of Dell, you probably couldn't get your hands on, at least easily. What Wells does that's unique is it makes its macroeconomic research free to the public. It's a longstanding thing we've had since I've been around and well before that. And the basic idea is Wells is a little bit of a unique bank in that we obviously have an investment bank. I work in it. But Wells is also a really, really big retail bank, middle market bank. And so the idea is that macro research like that is really applicable to a lot of different people. It's applicable to people for all kinds of reasons. And so the firm made a decision years ago that they've stuck with to kind of make this free, even if normally we would provide in a more traditional business model it only to private clients. That's not what we do. And the idea is that we can leverage it across so many different parts of the bank, to clients of all different shapes and sizes, and hopefully generate a lot of goodwill with people all around the world, really, in making this research completely free to the public. So the research you're seeing on that website is no different than we would provide to a hedge fund, to a large corporate, to an asset manager, which is really unique. And there are not a lot of investment banks that do that. And we don't do it for all of our research, some for regulatory and compliance reasons. But for macro research, we actually can. So I would say for my role specifically, it's very public. But for research and investment bank in general, it's generally much more private driven.
Awesome. Thank you. Next, we have, what does your work-life balance look like?
Yeah, so I touched on this a little bit, and I would say it's good depending on your frame of reference, right? If your frame of reference is so when I moved to Charlotte, my roommate was an investment banker. He worked for a different firm. It wasn't Wells Fargo. But he worked way more than me. Most weekdays, it was 9 to 1 a.m. And then on the weekends, he would work 7, 8 hours on Saturdays and Sundays. I don't do anything like that. Like I said, on average day, like today, I got up, I don't have a commute anymore, so I wake up like 20 minutes before I have to start. So I get up at like 6:45. I'm online by like 7:15. I probably would have worked a little bit longer today if I hadn't done this, but by around this time, I'd be finishing up. And that's my day. Now, again, the big caveat is the travel. Some travel is really easy. Some travel is awful, particularly when I was taking classes in person. So I can't tell you the number of, I just to give you a couple examples, I had one where in this past fall, I woke up, I worked all day. I then went down to NYU for class. So I caught some dinner right around now, had class at 6:30. And then I had to be in San Francisco the next morning for a presentation. And I didn't want to miss class, but I had no choice to go to the presentation. It's my job, it's what I get paid to do. So I just left class a little early at like 9:30-ish maybe, caught a taxi to JFK, and then jumped on like an 11 o'clock flight. It was the very last flight from New York to San Francisco. Landed at like 2 a.m., which is like 5 a.m. on my body. Went to the hotel, caught like a couple hours sleep, and then woke up. And like, it's not like I just had to wake up and be present. Like I was presenting. I was the first person to go. Those Asia trips, like, I would land in a country. Those countries are far apart. I'd never been to Asia before. I didn't know that. But like flying from like, Tokyo to Singapore is like 7 hours. Philippines to Thailand is like 4 or 5. Like it's like flying from New York to Houston. So the way those days would go is like you would land in a city at 10 o'clock at night and go through customs and get in a car and go to the hotel, go to bed at like midnight, wake up at 6 a.m., get some breakfast, and then you're there for a day, right? They're trying to maximize your time. They spend a lot of money to get you out there. You're not there very often. And so I'm going from meeting to meeting, and then at 4 or 5 o'clock, getting back in a car, going to the airport and doing it again. So like, that's probably not a great work-life balance, but that's more intermittent, right? Or other times it's hard. Like it's different from consulting, and that consulting's a little more regimented in that like, the city you're going to for 6 months at a time because you're on the case. Mm-hmm. I go all over the place, sometimes on short notice, where they're like, hey, we need you to be somewhere in 2 weeks. And like, you don't really have a huge say in that. So that can be difficult and challenging, but personally, I like it. I would rather do that than work longer hours and be at a desk all day. So I would say net, for me, the work-life balance is a plus.
Awesome. Thank you for specific examples, Michael.
Yeah.
Let's see. So the last question that I have here is, what skills did you develop early in your career? So we talked a little bit about your undergrad skills. What about the in-between undergrad and where you are now? What skills did you develop?
I think the number one skill I learned right out of school is 2 things. And they're not maybe what you would expect. Like, one is just patience with grunt work. Like, that is the nature of your first job in 90% of what you do. And I had no patience. I'll admit it. I did not have a lot of patience for like the low man on the totem pole job right out of the bat. And it's something that once you just realize that's the nature of your first job, that it's fine. And it's in fact probably how it should work. You have to learn how to crawl before you can walk, before you can run. And like, I came into my job with the passion for these subjects and wanted to write on them right away. And it's like, hey, slow down. You've never written a research report in your life. Like, what we need is support for editing and finding data and cleaning data and making charts and making presentations. And that stuff is important. And I find it important now where like I can communicate with someone who's helping me in those subjects because I've done them already. And I have a very good grasp on like what's feasible, what's not, how long something will take if I ask someone of something. And then the second thing is being detail-oriented. Being detail-oriented is so important because I, at first, was kind of working on the support side for more senior people on these trips. And the last thing you want is your boss standing up in front of this audience at like the Hong Kong Chamber of Commerce. And then there's some just awful typo, like insert text here on a slide. Like, you don't want that. And that's hard when you've got 70 slides and you're working on a lot of stuff, or like the first time you press send on one of those reports, nerve-wracking. The distribution lists are like 20,000 people, and you're like, what if I attach the wrong document? What if the pages are out of order? Like, what if I was accidentally sending an IM to a friend and it accidentally got inserted in page 4 and I just missed it?
Oh, God.
Like, an endless number of things that make you nervous, that it's important to be detail-oriented on. And I'd never been a doctor or lots of other jobs, but like, your actions have consequences in a way they don't in school, where if you do that on an essay, like the professor docks 10 points and your life just goes on. And it may seem like the end of the world at the time, but it's not that significant. So like that kind of detail-oriented stuff, I feel like took time, where I would work with someone a year or two older than me, and I would just be like, how could you possibly notice such a small detail? And it's just because you start to train yourself to pay attention to that stuff when you realize how important it is. And now, I say to new hires all the time, like, I can often teach you a lot of hard skills, quantitative stuff and other things. It's hard to teach someone to be detail-oriented. It's just a hard thing to get. You can tell them it's important. But it's a very, like, how would you get someone to be detail-oriented? Is, if you have ideas, put those in the chat, because I would really like to hear them. And so it's a trial and error thing. Everyone makes mistakes. You're never perfect. But I think that was something right out of the gate, once I learned, I think was a really valuable skill, because now I feel like I'm even more detail-oriented than most of the people I work with. And it shows, hopefully, as I'm training people.
I think it takes one mistake, and that will force you. That's all it is. It takes.
Oh yeah, when you've had one mistake that sends your heart rate to 200 beats per minute.
Yep, that will teach.
It's a moment you won't forget soon. Yeah.
Okay, so our last question, Jen is actually asking it. She is saying, can you talk about your decision around returning to school for your MA? How supportive as well as Fargo been?
Right. Very supportive. And it was tough. I've been kind of flirting with going back to school since undergraduate, when I was thinking about staying in that. And I thought about doing it full time, but I really just wasn't sure. And so I just had a very honest conversation with my team, my managers, and said, look, here's kind of what I want. Is this something that you guys can accommodate or not? And I was very fortunate in that they were. And there's a give and take, right? I have to understand sometimes that in that San Francisco circumstance, like, they needed me, and like, I just needed to like push through it. Mm-hmm. And then there are other moments where I just say, like, I cannot do this for a reason X. And my team's understanding, and we help each other out. And I say, hey, I need you to cover this for me. And then, maybe I then get the Nova Scotia presentation in like the first week of February. And like, so there's a little bit of a trade there, but like that kind of teamwork mindset has been great. And I knew I wanted a graduate degree at some point. I like the program I'm in. I get to take a few classes at Stern. And that's pretty cool. It's been a good experience so far. It's hard. Don't get me wrong. I think that would be my number one takeaway from doing part-time schooling. It is really hard after you've worked 10 or 11 hours to sit in a classroom in like dress clothes and just focus, particularly in a quantitative subject where, it's like, if you're taking those classes now, you remember them from high school, you miss like 5 minutes and suddenly you might as well just get up and leave the room. Yeah. Because you're like, well, I'm behind and I'm going to have someone show me this after class now. So I might as well just go get some like Chick-fil-A in the cab or something like that. So it's difficult, much harder than I knew it would be hard. And I would say it was harder than I expected. But it's also really rewarding because you feel like your career doesn't have to pause for 2 years or 3 years, however long you go back to school. My career kind of kept going, both from an advancement standpoint, from a financial standpoint, and I'm getting the degree. So pros and cons, no different than anything else. But I'm happy I did it.
I'd love for you to elaborate a little bit on how you negotiated that with your supervisor, how you advocated for yourself, because I think that is something that, as an undergrad, I mean, I didn't feel as comfortable doing that. I'm sure you didn't as well. Right. So how did you approach that conversation? And hopefully this can be a teaching moment for students here who maybe are negotiating salaries or negotiating places that they want to work or accept.
Yeah. So, it's a little unique with me just because of the idea that like there was an expectation we would probably do something else after the 2 years. Where it got more interesting was when they decided it was a mix of decision and opportunity, but when they wanted to keep me on. Mm-hmm. And so when they kind of expressed interest in promoting me, I just said, look, here is kind of what's important to me. And I think the advice I would give you is you have to recognize that isn't maybe a negotiation. And you have to understand then that like you can't have everything. Mm-hmm. So like if I wanted to move to New York, so if location was important and I wanted to go to school at night, that maybe gives you less opportunity from a salary standpoint to negotiate or whatever it is that you kind of have on your table. So what I would maybe encourage you to do is recognize the things that are important to you. They're all important. Everything's important. Work-life balance, vacation time, pay, schooling, it's all a mix, but everyone's going to have different priorities. And so be honest with yourself about what is genuinely a deal breaker and what's not. Like, you can do your best to play tough guy negotiator and maybe you'll be successful at it. But like, if you say to them, this is something that I have to have, I personally think you need to mean it. Because if you don't mean it, you've got to be prepared for what the consequences of that are going to be. And I meant it. And I said, to kind of my manager and my manager's manager, this is important to me. And if it's not something that we can accommodate, then this may not be a good fit. If it is something you can accommodate, like, you kind of have from my side, my word, that I'm going to give it my all. And it was a risk on both sides, right? You're not 100% sure how it's going to go from their side, and from their side, they're not sure how it's going to go with me. But I knew I would give it my all. They for sure reciprocated it in the other direction, and it's been a success so far. But I think for me was what I just tried to say to myself is, truly, do I mean it when I say this is something I really have as an important thing? Because if I don't, you're really just kind of trying to negotiate as much as you can out of it, which is, can be good, but can also be playing with fire, in my opinion.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that actually was my last question. I know I said, last question, but this has been such a good conversation, Michael. We are so appreciative to have you here. And I'm sure that students will be interested in speaking to you after this. We'll connect to see, well, I guess I'll ask you now, are you okay with them reaching out to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I normally, I've spoken with students that Jen has passed me before, a couple of econ professors I'm still in touch with. And, we hire normally 2 interns every summer with hope of them turning into full-time offers. We usually have a strong preference for econ majors. Not to say we've never hired outside of an econ major, but econ and obviously I was government, really common majors, econ alone. And we hire from UVA a lot. I was one of the first UVA students we hired, and I've really tried to push to keep them coming. And since I've been in the group, I think we've done a couple, and we have a UVA intern this year, actually. She just started on Monday. So, if you're really, really interested, don't be afraid to reach out and talk more. And by all means, happy to help.
For bulldozing for us and clearing a path for other UVA students. Everyone, I've just input the link to Michael's LinkedIn. So again, we're so appreciative of you. Students, thank you for being here. That concludes our show tonight, our program, workshop, our informational interview, whatever you want to call it. Thank you, Michael.
Great. Thanks a lot. Thanks, everyone.